Fanalysis uses the analytics of fantasy football combined with the metrics of sports betting to find the sharpest angles. And for that, we bring in a sports handicapper you can find on Twitter as Old Man Who Bets, Geoff Sheasby, and a sports investment analyst from SportsGrid, Jared Smith. Guys, when there are only one game left, we've got to find a lot of different ways to make plays. And that's where the props come into play. So let's start with the anytime score. This is favorite is Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, both at -175. But how do you guys see it? Where's the value here? Geoff, we'll start with you.
Yeah, Steve, I'm focusing on the Bucs on these touchdown scores. The Chiefs, just not for me this week. You know, Kelce at 175, Hill at 175, too much juice. Tampa Bay ranked #1 in terms of defensive rush efficiency. You've got Edwards-Helaire and Darrell Williams splitting carries. Don't love that. And then maybe you take a chance from the Chiefs on one of their speedy wide receivers, but hard to predict targets from that crew. Hardman, Watkins, Robinson, Pringle. So no action on the Chiefs side for me. I do like a few spots on the Bucs. The first we'll start with in what I think is the no-brainer at Evans at +125. Evans is #3 in terms of red zone TDs in the league. He's tied with Kelce. Evans is +125. Kelce is -175. Already, I think we're seeing some value there. And Evans has scored in back-to-back games. Tom Brady loves him in that red zone. The Chiefs are #16 in terms of passing efficiency. I think this guy's going to feast. But ones that I think are a little bit more longer shots here, I want to look at the tight ends and I want to look at the running backs. I think the tight ends here, we just hit Cameron Brate last week at +400. That has moved up to +260. I think what's really interesting to him is just to look at his usage. After averaging just 2 targets per game in the regular season, he's become a target machine in the playoffs. He has 6 targets, 5 targets, and 5 targets in the last 3 games. And let's not forget that Cameron Brate here was a touchdown machine back with Jameis Winston in 2017, 6 touchdowns, 2018, 6 touchdowns, still 4 last year, but he's a good red zone player. Other side of the tight end realm here, we've got Gronk at +225. I think that's super interesting as well. Even though his targets have dwindled, he was averaging 4.8 targets per game in the regular season. He's seen 1, 5, and 1 in the postseason. But he did light up Kansas City earlier this year, 6 for 7, 106 yards. This isn't going to be the first time we've ever seen Tom Brady thrive with 2 tight ends at his disposal. So I think there's pretty decent value on both of those. Last but certainly not least, touching upon the running backs here. First off, Kansas City defense, #31 in the league in terms of rushing defense efficiency. I think that's something they look to exploit. Leonard is the obvious one here at +120, but I do think Ronald Jones at +225 is interesting as well. Leonard, I think the discrepancy of the odds here is just Leonard's more recent usage. I think in the last 3 games, Leonard has dominated carries and seen way more passing attempts, 4, 6, and 7 targets in the playoffs compared to 0 for Ronald Jones. But nonetheless, these guys do both get carries. In the playoffs, Fournette's had 19, 17, and 12. Rojo's only played 2 out of the 3 games, but he did have 13 and 10. And earlier in the season had 9 for 66 with a touchdown receiving, but nonetheless a touchdown against this Chief team. So I think the combination of enough carries, who knows who's going to be on there. I could see either of them punching in a 6-yard score. So I like to play probably both of those tight ends and maybe both of those running backs. At this point, we're gambling a little bit. You already said it. It's the last game of the season. We're extending our reach into more plays. So for sure, don't empty the 401k on here. Save that for GameStop. But nonetheless, it'll be.
That for GameStop.
I think some fun, fun gambles, safer gambles. I think these are the spots to target.
Well, and then I think you actually brought up a great point here with Rob Gronkowski. This guy came out of retirement to play with Tom Brady, and if you're going to play in the Super Bowl with Tom Brady, Gronk wants to catch one of those touchdowns. If you don't get him the ball, it's like the Bears going to the Super Bowl and not handing it off to Walter Payton. Where do you see this, Jared? Where do you see the value plays? Does it come with players that are more versatile, give you more opportunities to score?
Yeah, and that's a good point. And certainly Geoff makes some interesting points about where the running back market is. And I also fully endorse the Evans pick. He's going to be in a lot of my action this week because I think he's definitely been Tom Brady's go-to guy. I do think Kansas City's going to score some touchdowns in this game. So that means somebody has to find the end zone. Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, the value has been so sucked out of those numbers. I do think it makes sense to find some value elsewhere. I kind of like Mecole Hardman. You're getting 2-1. He scored a touchdown last week. He had that total brutal gaffe on the punt return that led to to some Bills points, and he bounced back with that score, and he had a really big running play in the second half as well. And he also can return some kicks and punts. So he has some interesting ways to score. He can rush, he can receive, and he can do it on special teams as well. I think there's a lot of interesting players at the bottom of the market. I certainly think Patrick Mahomes is worth a look. He's almost 3-1. He scored a touchdown in last year's game. And when you talk about what the handicap is going to be for the Bucs, their main focus is going to be to stop the run and stop Patrick Mahomes from escaping the pocket. So that would, you would think, create some lanes on the outside for some of those speedy receivers. So I think that's where the value is. At the top of the market in this stage of the game, everything's been sucked out. And I fully endorse everything Geoff said about being very cautious with these props. At this stage of the game, it's the sharpest the market has been all year long. And I think it makes sense to kind of throttle down your action. So if you really like a play, maybe you go a half a unit. If you don't like a play that much and you just want some action, maybe you just throw a little sprinkle, a quarter unit on there, because I don't think you're getting the full maximum value that we've gotten maybe in some prior weeks, especially with the touchdowns.
But that's the fun of the Super Bowl, is to play as many props as you possibly can. And one interesting prop here, and I'll stick with you on this one, Jared. Tom Brady, a plus-minus 1/2 yard rushing, is plus 165. He literally only needs a 4th and 1 quarterback sneak to hit on this one.
And he's the sneak wizard. Yeah. And he's also had 30 rushing yards in the Super Bowl before. So this isn't totally foreign to him. And it's the last game of the year. You would think that there would be an element of momentum, like, hey, I don't have to hold anything back. I can go on that scramble. Let's say it's 3rd and 6, and they're going to give Tom Brady all the room to run that he wants. It's kind of like in the NBA when a shooter's shooting 20% from the 3, the defense is going to let him shoot as much as he wants.
Oh, they want him to run because they want to hit. It comes on the backside of it.
Exactly, and that's another interesting point. Tom's perfected the slide over the years. I just think this is one of those fun plays that when I was scanning the board, Steve, it just kind of stood out to me like, you know what? If I'm going to throw a few shekels on a bunch of different things in the Super Bowl, I want to have some fun with it. This is one that I can root for, and it's not going to take a lot to get across the finish line.
I was going to say, man, that is a true Jets fan, just begging Tom Brady to run into the heart of that defense. And that's what you're going to be cheering for the entire game.
Absolutely.
But speaking of former Patriots, Geoff, I want to talk about Rob Gronkowski's over-under is at 30.5. His stats historically in the Super Bowl don't measure up with what we've seen out of him recently in this year's postseason.
Yeah, this is not one I'm overly passionate about. I think if you are going to take a side, you have to go for the over here at 30.5. Inconsistent targets is the biggest concern. He has seen 1-5-1 in the postseason, again, averaging, 4.8 during the regular season. If he was still averaging that 4.8, I would say over easily. But I think we look at previous games' performance here to pick a side. 6 for 7, 106 yards in their first matchup. I think these tight ends are going to continue to eat. Tom Brady loves a guy that he can trust over the years. Obviously, and his Super Bowl numbers historically have been pretty good. So not my favorite play of the board, but I think over is where you need to go at 30.5 on that one.
And another one that everybody loves to bet is the Super Bowl MVP. Now, chalk is obviously Mahomes and Brady. Those are clear, far and away favorites because they almost always give it to a quarterback. But if there is value a little further down the line, Jared, where might you put a little gold star?
Well, I went very far down the line here, Stephen, and I think the first thing you have to do with the MVP is you have to, in your brain, you have to write the game script. You have to turn into Quentin Tarantino or Steven Spielberg. You have to write that game script. How is it going to play out? Well, if the Chiefs win the game, I think it's a pretty obvious narrative. Patrick Mahomes leads them to victory. Maybe the defense does its thing, but I think the overall prevailing narrative will be Patrick Mahomes wins the Super Bowl just like he did last year when he was the MVP. Well, let's go to the other side because, it's only a 3-point spread. It's not totally outside the realm of possibility that the Tampa Bay Bucs do win this game. Well, if the Bucs win the game, the narrative you would think would be the defense held down Patrick Mahomes, and that's why they won. And we have some precedent for this. Over the last 7 years, 2 linebackers have won the MVP, Malcolm Smith and Von Miller. So it's not totally outside the realm of possibility for a guy like Devin White, who's had 1 million tackles in 2 weeks, to be the MVP at 100-1. And that's a price to me that catches my attention. Anytime it's a 3-figure price in front of the one, Steve, you have my full and undivided attention. And the narrative could match up to that if the Bucs can play defense and defend, and if Devin White can do what he did in the prior 2 games. He had 15 tackles against the Packers. He was the MVP, I think, of that game against Green Bay, holding that Packers offense in check. There's no reason why they can't do it again next week in the Super Bowl.
Do you agree, Geoff, that sometimes a little bit further down the line, you might be able to find some value, especially if the odds are so great against them?
Yeah, for sure. This is one of those things, I agree with all of Jared's points, but it could be even, a million tackles or just one key play. He gets interceptions as well. One quick pick, and that changes the momentum of the game. That gets the Bucs the W. Bam, there's your MVP. Will it be tough, I think, with Brady potentially getting his 7th ring, kind of honoring the body of work? Yeah, maybe. But again, as Jared said, with 3 figures to 1, it feels like a fun gamble.
It's 3 fingers to 1. That's
3 figures. What? 100 to 1,
okay.
300 to 1.
See, I thought you were talking about JPP.
No. Not Raz
him too.
How would you feel about JPP as the MVP?
Yeah, same kind of thing. He can come around the edge and get some fumble recoveries. Jared, you got any hot stats there?
Well, I mean, this is a guy that's been to the Super Bowl before, and that was the thing that stood out to me about that. And the irony is that was the game against Tom Brady, against the Patriots. It was the 2nd Super Bowl for the Giants in that run. And again, I mean, if you watch that game against the Packers, I think we all can safely say that he disrupted the offense and what Aaron Rodgers was trying to do very much. And again, write that game script in your head. How do the Bucs win? They have to disrupt what Patrick Mahomes does. He's a guy who can do that. So the narrative matches, and Jeff's right. Like, this is not something I'm going to write home about, say, oh, this is the best bet I ever made in my life, unless it hits, because then it is. Because when you're betting at something 100 to 1, you don't expect it to hit. The implied odds of that is like 0.1%. So I think it's a fun bet to make. It's a low risk, high reward kind of play. And I think in the Super Bowl, that's where our bet should gravitate towards.
And that's what makes betting the Super Bowl so fun. That's a look at some of the props. But what about the crazier prop bets? Check those out in our other segment. For Jared Smith of SportsGrid and Geoff Sheasby, I'm Steve Overmyer. This is Fanalysis.